me ask you a question. Why do so many organizations grow in revenue, but not in execution? They hire talented people, they invest in technology, they create strategic plans, run leadership retreats, implement new KPIs, and yet projects stall, departments still compete, meetings multiply, decisions slow down, leaders become overwhelmed, and execution feels harder every year. Here is the question nobody seems to ask. What if your organization isn't struggling to scale because it lacks talent, but because it lacks alignment? Because here is something I have learned after working with growing organizations. You cannot sustainably scale execution by adding more people. You scale execution by creating a system where people think together before they work together. That is the foundation of my organizational cognitive alignment model. Today, I'm going to show you why execution breaks down as organizations grow, why traditional scaling strategies eventually stop working, and the only sustainable way to build an organization that executes consistently without becoming dependent on the founder or senior leadership. And somewhere in this conversation, you may discover that your biggest execution problem isn't operational. It is indeed cognitive. So let's begin. One of the biggest myths in business is this: growth automatically creates scale. It doesn't. Growth creates complexity. Scale requires alignment. Those are two different things. Imagine adding more musicians to an orchestra. You add more violins, you add more trumpets, you add more percussion. Does the music automatically improve? Of course not. It doesn't. Without a shared conductor and a shared interpretation of the score, adding more musicians simply creates more noise. Organizations behave the same way. As companies grow, they don't just gain more employees, they gain more interpretations, they gain more assumptions, they gain more priorities, more perspectives, more decision makers. Unless those perspectives become aligned, complexity begins replacing clarity. That is why many organizations become slower after they grow. Not because people become less capable, because cognitive alignment became weaker. The cognitive alignment became weaker. Let's talk about what actually causes execution failure in organizations. Often, leaders blame communication. I rarely do. Because communication is often the visible symptom. The visible symptom. The deeper problem is actually interpretation. Imagine the CEO says, customer experience is our top priority. Marketing hears, improve brand perception. Operation hears, increase service speed. Finance hears, control costs while serving customers. Sales hears, close more deals. Everyone had the same words. They had the same words, but everyone interpreted them differently. Now, multiply that across hundreds of decisions every week. That is where execution begins to fracture. Think about Captain America in the movie Civil War. Both sides wanted to protect humanity. Neither side lacked intelligence. Neither side lacked commitment. What they lacked was a shared interpretation of how success should be achieved. That is what exactly happens inside organizations. Execution problems are often thinking problems before they become operational problems. Yes, they start with the thinking and then they become operational problems. This realization led me to develop what I call the Organizational Cognitive Alignment Model, or OCAM. The model starts with a simple belief: organizations execute at the speed of shared understanding, not shared information, but shared understanding. There's a difference. My model focuses on aligning 5 organizational dimensions. Number 1, strategic interpretation. Does everyone understand success the same way? Not just the strategy, its meaning. Number 2, decision priorities. When trade-offs appear, do people know what matters most? Do they know? Because pressure exposes priorities. Number 3, accountability logic. Does everyone understand ownership consistently? Or do tasks keep falling between departments? Number 4, cross-functional thinking. Do departments organize for organizational success or only departmental success? Number 5, reinforcement systems. Does the organization reward aligned behavior or conflicting behavior? When these 5 dimensions align, execution accelerates naturally, not because people suddenly became smarter, no, because unnecessary friction disappears. Yes, unnecessary friction disappears. Many organizations try to improve execution by increasing control. They have more meetings, they have more reports, they have more approvals, they have more dashboards, they have more oversight. Initially, it feels responsible. This feels quite responsible, but eventually it creates dependency. Imagine driving a car where the steering wheel must be corrected every 5 seconds. You'll still reach your destination for sure, but the journey becomes exhausting. That's what happens when leadership becomes the organization's central nervous system. Every decision flows upward. Every clarification requires leadership. Every conflict requires executive intervention. That isn't scalable. That is organizational dependency. The goal isn't building an organization that constantly waits for leadership. That's not the goal. The goal is building an organization that consistently thinks like leadership. That's a completely different objective. And that's where cognitive alignment changes everything. So, how do organizations actually scale execution? How do they actually scale execution? Through 3 leadership shifts. Shift number 1, stop managing tasks, start aligning thinking. Leaders often spend enormous time checking execution. Instead, ask, how is my team interpreting this priority? Because interpretation predicts execution. Shift number 2, build decision filters. The strongest organizations don't create rules for every situation. They don't. They create decision principles. When employees understand how decisions should be made, they require less supervision. That is scalability. Shift number 3, reinforce what matters. Organizations don't become what leaders announce. They become what leaders consistently reward. If collaboration matters, reward collaboration. If ownership matters, reward ownership and recognize it. If strategic thinking matters, celebrate strategic thinking. Culture isn't built by slogans. It is built by reinforcement. And this reinforcement creates organizational memory. Let me leave you with this. Every growing organization eventually reaches a crossroad. It does. One path leads to increasing complexity, where you have more meetings, you have more approvals, you have more reminders, you have more leadership intervention. The other path leads to increasing alignment. This is where you have clearer priorities, better decisions, shared interpretation, distributed ownership, and sustainable execution. The organizations that scale successfully aren't necessarily those with the smartest people. They are the ones where people think coherently together. Because execution is never just about activity, it's about alignment. That is why I believe the future of organizational performance isn't found in better productivity tools or better project management software or better reporting systems. Those things have value. They do. But they cannot solve fragmented organizational thinking. The only sustainable way to scale execution is to build an organization where strategy is interpreted consistently. Priorities are understood collectively. Accountability is shared confidently, and decisions reinforce the same organizational purpose. That is exactly what the organizational cognitive alignment model is designed to create. Not organizations that depend on exceptional leaders, but organizations that consistently produce exceptional execution. Remember this, execution doesn't scale because people work harder. Execution scales because people think together. And when organizational thinking becomes aligned, execution stops depending on constant supervision. It becomes part of the organization's DNA. That is sustainable scale. That is sustainable scale. If this message challenged the way you think about organizational growth, comment here below with the word alignment. I would also love to know, where does execution break down most often in your organization? Is it in decision making, priorities, accountability, cross-functional collaboration, or strategic interpretation? And if you are ready to build an organization where execution scales without increasing leadership exhaustion, subscribe to the channel, because the organizations that outperform the competition won't simply have better people. They'll have better aligned thinking.